Hi everyone, let's talk about Charles Perrault. He is the collector of three tales that we're going to read together, along with several other tales that you can find on your own, namely Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty in the Wood, and Bluebeard. We have the versions that he collected. So let me tell you a little bit about Perrault as a person. He was French. He was born in Paris in 1628, so this is significantly earlier than the Brothers Grimm. He was born in a wealthy family. He was very well educated. You can tell that as you read what he has written. And for most of his adult life, he worked in government. He was an aristocrat. He had a lot of very powerful, wealthy friends who had a lot of time on their hands. And he was very active in literary circles. So he and his friends would write creatively, get into all kinds of literary debates, and share what they had written with each other. When he was older, he retired and he wrote stories or tales from times past with morals, tales from Mother Goose. You can see a copy of one version of this on the screen along with a picture of what Perrault looked like at about that time. He published this originally under his son's name, which was Pierre, because in these literary circles he had actually made some enemies getting into these hot and heavy literary debates. In his book, he told well-known stories. So everyone would have already known Little Red Riding Hood or Bluebeard, just as we know some fairy tales today. But he did this in his own voice, and he wrote them down to be read, not to be told again orally. And so that's what we call the literary fairy tale. He was not the first person to write down fairy tales, but he was one of the earliest for sure, and the earliest one that we still really do read today, and one of the earliest ones for his fairy tale versions to kind of stick with us in popular culture. When he wrote this book, it was not designed for children to be read to by their parents. It was more for his own friends, his own family, for fun, for their own amusement, just as a hobby. His voice really sounds like he is writing these tales for adults. You can tell this first of all because there is a tone of satire, kind of knowing, ironic wit that would be most appreciated by adults who already know these fairy tales and will find it amusing to kind of make fun of the tales a little bit. An example of this would be in the story Donkey Skin, when he says, quote, "People may say bad things about marriage, but it's an excellent remedy for love sickness." That's kind of an adult joke. Or in the story Little Thumbling, he says, quote, "Everyone was astonished that the woodcutter had had so many children in such a short time, but his wife didn't waste any time, and she never had fewer than 2 at a time." That's also another adult joke. One of Perrault's lasting influences is that he often added morals to his story. He would write these as little poems in verse. That's where we get the idea that these tales should have morals. This is not an inextricable part of fairy tales. It is not the original purpose or intention of fairy tales. Perrault did that and it stuck. A typical Perrault moral might be for this one. See if you can guess what story it's from. "Many a girl has waited long for a husband brave or strong, but I'm sure I never met any sort of woman yet who could wait 100 years, free from fretting, free from fears. Now our story seems to show that a century or so, late or early, matters not. True love comes by fairy lot. Some old folk will even say it grows better by delay. Yet this good advice, I fear, helps us neither there nor here. Though philosophers may prate how much wiser 'tis to wait, maids will be a-sighing still. Young blood must when young blood will." So in other words, it's talking about how young people won't wait until marriage, unlike Sleeping Beauty, which is the story that's from. So keep in mind 3 important things about Perrault. He's writing literary fairy tales for other adults. He did this all 85 plus years before the Grimm brothers came around, and he's where we get the idea that fairy tales should have morals.